Welcome to a Draft Eve edition of Expected Buffalo, the podcast. I last night was the first time I recorded an actual podcast and had to delete 9 minutes of it after I published it because I only had it off for like 2 minutes. Had to eliminate the entire last 9 minutes of that because there was some Peterka talk and other stuff which was irrelevant once that happened. So going live today prevents that in a sense. And you never know, maybe something happens while we're going here because we're in that type of season. But God, I hope not, because I am exhausted, and being up till 2 a.m. last night was not fun when you had to get back up at 6:30 again. But here we are. The NHL draft is tomorrow, at least round 1, and then 2 through 7 will be on Saturday. Free agency opens on Tuesday, and we are really in the thick of it here with the offseason for the NHL. Before we get into that, of course, I have to go through our fabulous sponsors, which are One Pie Pizza, onepiepizza.com, 2185 Clinton Street in West Seneca, open daily from 9 to 8. And then Hiller and Comerford Law Firm, hillercomerford.com, 1866 Hiller Law, your local personal and injury disability go-to. Today, what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, we have a lot to talk about. I'm going to get a little bit into Peterka. I don't want to go crazy there because I wrote an article that I think you can just read my thoughts, and I don't want to be repetitive. But I'll get into it a little bit, and then we're going to obviously talk about Byram. That's the other shoe we're kind of waiting to drop here. And then we'll get into the draft overall, including 9 overall. And then if I'm not exhausted as I go through all of that, maybe we'll have a little fun, and I'll answer a few questions out of the comments here. Because why not? It's supposed to be Mailbag Thursday, but a lot of the mailbag questions are irrelevant now that we have a trade that went down last night. So if you were under a rock and you're just waking up from a long slumber, let's say, which I know most of you are not, or any of you probably, Peterka to the Utah Mammoth. I almost said Utah Jazz. Utah Mammoth for Michael Kesselring and Josh Doan. It's funny. Usually I get more excited about getting a guy that we talked about a lot in our mock off seasons, not only our written content, but our podcast versions as well. I think Anthony, myself, mocked Kesselring to the Sabres 2 or 3 different times in total. And that ended up being the case. I think he's a fine addition. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of everything with him. He played some second pair minutes last season with Utah when they had Dursey and they had Marino out, and then he got knocked back down to third pair minutes. But really, the thing is going to be there, and it's kind of in the sense the same thing with Doan. Even if they just have him play third pair minutes, or they kind of boost him up to second line, depending on what we do here. I think the overall takeaway here, and maybe that's where I'll go, and I'll get into some other stuff that's happened today on Peterka, with the trade stuff and all of that came out. But really, I think my main takeaway on this is I don't mind what they got back. In the sense, I don't mind the players. I think Kesselring can help them. I think it'll make them a better team defensively. I think Doan will help them be a better team all around defensively and more difficult to play against. And those type of things are stuff that we talked about and that I've talked about, targeting and what they would want to do in Josh Doan and improving their offense, improving their forward group, being more difficult to play against, bringing in a more, a better defensive forward. I mean, it's only 62 games in the NHL, but he looks like he's more equipped to play a two-way game, and he's a better forechecker. And then Kesselring being what he is, but really for me, it's 2 things. You're taking 2 risks essentially in trying to, and hoping that those guys can still put up similar numbers when you push them into an elevated role. So Kesselring jumping onto the first or second pair, depending who they pair him with. And then in the case of Doan, we'll really get to see what they do here to I guess get a full picture of what they then do with Doan. But let's say they want him to be, on their second line, and that's not uncommon, to bring in more defensive side and bring a little bit of a different style to that group. But same thing, you might be asking him to take a step. And even in the third line role, you might be asking him to take a little bit more of a step, playing a full 82 game season, when there's more tape on you and the wear of that. And I think that's, again, you're taking some gambles there. We're in a Peterka trade specifically. I wanted more certainty back in that. I didn't want two pieces or multiple pieces that I had to hope I could elevate or hope could step into the next thing. I expected to get a player back or players that I know can do what I need them to do. And I think that is really where my whole underwhelming aspect of this comes. And on Peterka himself, whatever. But best of luck to him. Not a perfect player by any means. We all know the defensive side of it, and we're going to find out. We're going to find out how much of that, the on ice goal numbers we see in those charts that get posted are, him driving that, or is it when he plays with Tage and that's driven by Tage and, he's just feeding off of that. But at the same time, in Utah, he's going to play with some good players, whether it be Cooley or Gunther. He'll have some good guys around him in Utah. So I think he'll be fine out there and play and produce at a similar level to what we saw in Buffalo. Now, the interesting thing that started to come out today on him was the reports on other offers that were on the table that the Sabres didn't pick or didn't elect to go with or didn't even go down the road, really. So before I get into those, my thing has been, and that's really where the Team One More In Me article that I wrote about, or the silent retool that I wrote about the other day before this happened, comes into play here. It's, do you believe that this front office has the capability to make win now moves to be successful? We've seen one. I don't know. It would probably be the return out of that one. We'll see what the second one is here in Byram, which we'll get to in a minute. But really, the ultimate overview of all of that is you shouldn't put yourself in a situation where you overly focus on one piece in a return. And in this instance, whether it would be Byram or whether it was Peterka, the focus was on a right shot defenseman. And by doing that, I think what they have done is eliminated more value returns potentially because they were so focused on just getting that right shot defenseman. And the reason to be so focused on that right shot defenseman is because of their inability to construct their roster properly. So what you have to do is you basically have to go around in a whack-a-mole form and whack all of your holes that keep popping up. So that, it was goaltending. It was more difficult to play against and improve your bottom six last year. And now here we are on right shot defenseman, and we're gonna focus on that, and then we got to focus on this. And we're really, if you are trading, Byram and you're trading Peterka, two significant players on your roster, you should be open to absolutely everything. You should be open to that Rossi trade, and I understand. Like, I'm not eating up that it didn't trade for Marco Rossi, and I genuinely believe that was on the table. Mike Russo is a very good reporter. There's no reason to lie about that. I believe that they offered Rossi, but they don't consider it. And I don't think it's really the short forward thing where maybe that's part of it. They don't want a small forward, whatever. But I think it's that Minnesota didn't have a right shot defenseman to go along with that. And with that not being the case, then okay, you're not in the conversation. And if you think of, some of the stuff that, I've heard on my end, though, some of the teams they went to, I think they targeted right shot defensemen in those offers and in those conversations. And some of the teams didn't want to do that. And again, it's boxing yourself in to just, this is specifically what I need, and everything else is noise. I'm not going to listen to my opportunity to get peak value because I'm just going to be so narrow focused on one thing. And I just don't think that's the way to go about it. I think you take a look at everything you have, you evaluate what is presented to you, and then you make what is best in terms of value back for your team. And I understand you have to really you have to take into account what your roster structure is too. But I just don't think you can turn things away like the way it seemed that they were so heavily focused on, we have to get a right shot, specifically a right shot too. Like, you know, I'm not that big on the handedness thing. So if there is a better left shot defenseman that is better than what you could have got as a right shot, that also should be on the table. But they were so keen on a right shot defenseman, and I think it put them in a bad spot, to be honest, of this whole Peterka thing. And now with making that Peterka move, it almost boxes them into, well, now you have to get a forward in some regard in a Byram trade. And we'll get to Byram in a second. I keep going to him. Maybe he's on my mind a lot, but we'll get to him in a second. But, to get back to, I think the offers that are out there, I believe the Rossi one was real. The other one was 2 first-round picks and roster players. Like, I don't know, like, what? Am I going to get 2 late first-round picks for Peterka? How was that really going to help me? You don't really know what those first-round picks were, so that's hard to really judge that one, if that was a real one. The Dobson thing, I think that is real. I guess I can kind of come out and say it now because I don't think it's not going to happen. But when I wrote the article about 9 overall, the main gist of that is they were considering 9 overall in a conversation with the Islanders, and what I was told for an Islanders defenseman. Now, if you piece it together, that gets you to probably Dobson. So it would make sense that Dobson was on the table, but the best way that I guess I'll put it is I don't think that was a Sabres decision to not do that. I just think that didn't work out for a specific reason, and it wasn't so much as the Sabres passing up on that. But I can say I'm pretty confident that Dobson was probably in the Peterka conversation, but for this specific reason, it didn't occur. And then I don't know, the Kyrou thing. It's hard because I don't want to just spit things out here because stuff I heard this morning might not be the same as it is right now. But the Kyrou thing, I think that they're interested in the player. I think they've had some conversations. But I feel like Peterka might have been the wrong player to be attached to Kyrou from the Sabres. So, he's an interesting name. His no movement clause does not kick into July 1st. So if they are going to move him, it would have to be ahead of July 1st, because then that takes away some of the I guess flexibility the Blues would have. I think the Blues are still a team to still watch here as things progress over the next few days. But again, we'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, I think overall the Sabres did have some options. I think they had some interesting ideas presented to them, but with them being focused on that right shot defenseman, they ultimately landed on what Utah offered them, and I think Doan helped that, and then I think Kesselring was somebody they were very interested in, and you can't overlook the money aspect of it. $1.4 million for a guy they can put in their top 4. That keeps that salary cap down, which we'll see what they do about that. All right, let's set Peterka aside for now. We talked for him about 15 minutes and move ourselves into Bo Byram, because that is the one we are all waiting for now. So Byram is going to be traded. I think we all know that. It will likely happen before July 1st because I don't think that they want to deal with any potential offer sheet on July 1st. So I'm fairly confident that he will go ahead of July 1st. It could be in the next 10 minutes. It could be at some point this weekend. I think they're really far down the path on that. It's hard to really pinpoint the exact teams that are involved in that. Philadelphia was one team that I said was in on it. I don't think they are any longer. Um, I think that's more on the Philadelphia end. Same thing. I think something came up that pulled them out of that one. So I don't think Philadelphia, again, things could change, but I don't think Philadelphia, as of this morning, at least I could say, was involved in that or still involved in that. St. Louis, like I said, is still a team I'd keep an eye on with Byram. I don't know if it would be Kyrou, but there's somebody I would keep an eye on. I don't think the Islanders would be a Byram team. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to mix the two together. Who else were some teams that I heard? Vancouver for sure. They're having a very interesting offseason over there, so they may be a team to keep an eye on. The Sabres are targeting a forward. I mean, Patterson isn't going to move, so I don't really know what they would target in Vancouver in terms of a forward. So that would maybe be one that's interesting. I know I saw Dreger run out like Colorado, Los Angeles. The Kings make sense if you think Jordan Spence has a return, but now they have Kessler ring, that doesn't work. And again, who on the Kings are they going to move from a forward perspective? I don't know. I have to relook at the roster, but again, and now like, this is the difficult part. Like I'm getting crossed up now trying to find logical landing spots because like I'm gonna focus on forward now, but it doesn't have to be the case. They could go out and get another defenseman, I guess, and then maybe sign a forward in free agency and like. But I don't think anyone significant in free agency is going to come here. I don't have any reason to believe that they would, especially with how some of the conversations have gone this summer in the trade market. I just don't believe you're going to get a free agent significant enough to come here. So that's why the Byram thing is back. To focus on forward. But yeah, I don't know. I my exhaustion brain, like I said, is kicking in here. So I'm having a difficult time really kind of thinking of teams that were there in front of me. I probably should have wrote them down. But St. Louis is someone I would definitely keep an eye on there. I think the Sabres have had multiple conversations on both Peterka and Byram. Not saying that is what's going to happen. To be very clear, they need to be very clear at this time of the year. But they're definitely a team I would keep an eye on. It's the thing with Byram is it's almost going to be difficult to upset me with the return on that one because I think overall that they're going to be a better team without him on it. And that's not to say that he's a bad player. I mean, there's upside to Byram. He has his skill set. He has his tools. We've seen him have success with Darlene. But I just think he's too repetitive on their skill set. And we're clearly seeing they're trying to get away from that. They're moving Peterka because he's not great defensively. I mean, on top of the other stuff off the ice, but he's not great defensively. And he's a finisher, and they already have too many of that. So what do? They bring in a defenseman who's pretty good defensively, bring some size, a better fit with Darlene or Power, and they bring in Doan, who's more of a forechecking style, a two-way game, more difficult to play against. They're trying to change the makeup of their team a little bit. So I respect it. But yeah, like I was saying, getting back to Byram, I just there's not really anything I think that would surprise or that would upset me. I know it's a challenge there that they might buy into. And it's not one thing. So to be clear, the off ice stuff that I just referenced for Peterka, I meant in terms of him wanting to be dealt. Nothing, with the bars and all that stuff. Just to be very clear on that. I was referencing him wanting to be moved. But yeah, like I'm running a risk challenging the Sabres to upset me with a Byram trade, but this league is interesting at times. It's funny to, as my son makes an appearance here. It's funny to think about it, it's been repetitive year over year how defensemen, whether they be left shot or whether they be right shot, are just more valuable in this league. And, it's something that myself and even Kevin, people on Twitter who follow Kevin, have always argued when forwards get moved or forwards come up. It's just the return is always less than what you think because there are more forwards in this league that play that you can get that are scorers that essentially play the style that Peterka is, that is easier to attain. Top four defensemen are a little bit more difficult to attain, and there's less of them. So, in typical supply and demand fashion, they are going to be more valuable. That is why I would not be surprised in any way, shape, or form if the Byram trade is a more significant return than what we have seen for Peterka, because there's just more value there still around the league. And I think people see the two-way game in Byram and believe that is what they need. He can help them on the power play. He can, they believe he can drive some offense and he can be good defensively and he skates well and he's flashy at times. All of those things are going to attract people's attention. He's only 24 years old. So you put all of that together, and I think it's very possible that the return outpaces what they would have got for Peterka. Maybe that makes some people happy and a little bit more in a better mood. At least that's what I'm hoping for. I hope that there's a decent return there to kind of put the puzzle piece in for what they did with Byram to now what they did with Peterka to now what they're doing with Byram and put everything together there. All right, I think that's it for now on Byram. The draft. So 9 overall. Tomorrow is the Sabres pick. As I tweeted out earlier, I still think they're considering options to use that 9th overall pick in a trade if it comes together. Maybe they would put it together with Byram and see what they can get. Speculation, possible. But I think what will most likely happen is that they keep that pick and they make the selection there. So I don't really need to spend a ton of time going into the prospects themselves. You can listen to the draft episode we did last night with Austin, and he goes into way more detail and way better than I am. But if I'm going to ramble off a few guys, Jake O'Brien is somebody that I would consider in that spot, maybe one of the highest end playmakers in this draft. If Higgins falls, I think you really have to consider him at 9. If Porter Martone falls, I think you really got to consider him at 9. Victor Eklund for sure. I know a lot of people if he's picked, are immediately going to say 5'10", another small European forward. That is just not his game whatsoever. So I really urge you to go listen to what Austin said about him yesterday in the podcast we did. Brady Martin could be somebody. Roger McQueen's another one that I think people will see size and they would consider. I have a lot of question marks there. I'm not a big Roger McQueen fan myself. Maybe there's a possibility that they go Roddy Merca, the defenseman. Kashawn Aitchison is somebody else that was mentioned by Jerry Fortin the other day. Maybe another defenseman slips in there. The kid that's going to Penn State, that's maybe he can fall into that group. But yeah, it's really interesting after 3. I think in some regard, you're going to see. I mean, obviously Schaefer's going to go 1. It seems like Frundell is going to go 2 to San Jose, and then talk about an absolute gift for the Blackhawks. They would get Michael Misa at 3 to combine with Connor Bedard. That could be a really nice pairing there between the two of them. And then at 4, I think it starts to kind of open up. From 4 to, or really from 4 on, I think you're anything can kind of happen within reason, of course. So there's a lot of players in that tier, and that's a little bit what Austin talked about yesterday. After you get away from Misa and Schaefer, that next tier is from about 3 to 10. And it's nice the Sabres are kind of at that back half of it because that maybe makes their trade more enticing, but whatever. There's a lot of players in that tier that I think that can go anywhere from 4 to 11. And it'll be fun. It'll make things interesting as we see those picks come in. And really, I'm interested to see just in general kind of how the whole feel is. Not having 15 people go up on stage, give speeches. I'm anticipating it's going to flow a little bit better, and that'll be a better probably show to watch. A little bit similar to the NHL draft. But yeah, I mean, whoever they pick isn't really going to upset me, to be honest, tomorrow. So there's going to be no angry tweets about who they pick. It'll be whatever. I think they'll get a decent player there, if they stay there as I expect. And then, we'll be on our way to then free agency, which would open on Tuesday. Qualifying offers are due on Monday. I also believe the buyout window closes on Monday as well. So busy days ahead here. All right. It's been 30 minutes. I forgot to bring my drink down, so my throat's a little bit dry here. But I'll go 3 questions. I'll answer 3 questions out of the comments here. So, fire them in there. I'll try to scroll up and see if there's anything in here already that we haven't already talked about. Let's see. Scrolling through. This isn't great podcast timing here to just delay and to wait. I believe somebody in here, and I can't find it, but somebody asked about the UPL thing. I don't think he's getting traded by any means. I saw someone else say if you go, I'm jumping off here. I really can't wait until this is all over from a rumor area, because like so many people that have gotten radioed. If you don't know what that is basically taking one line of like a 3-minute, let's say, just talk or rant, whatever. You take 45 seconds out of it or one line from it and make it seem like something it's really not. But anyways, that was the case again here. Friedman made his comment about, he wondered if Luke didn't be available, but then he went on to say that it would be unlikely. So no, I don't anticipate any changes in goal, especially with a lot of the guys. Thatcher Demko seems like he's going to extend in Vancouver. There's not a lot of interest. There's not a lot of interesting options or anything really that's considerably better than what you already have, or that you want to spend the cap space or assets on. So Luke and Levi still seem like they're going to be your 1-2 next season. All right. So some questions popped in here. Let's see if we can pick one. Will Buffalo do anything in free agency that is relevant? We'll throw this one up here. No, would be my anticipation. I don't think so. Look at this. The sun brings a drink. You heard me. What a helper. What a peach. I don't. I can't believe they actually did that. That threw me off. I don't think that they'll bring in anybody interesting, or let's say interesting. I think they're going to bring any well-known. I would doubt Ehlers. I would doubt, Ekblad, any of those top of the list guys. Probably not. And again, like I said a little bit ago, they're having a difficult time still getting people to come here. I don't think that they're going to be able to rope in one of those big guys. You never know. Maybe you throw enough money at somebody and somebody signs. If anything, I could see Ehlers being that, but I would anticipate what you would see for agencies, what we've seen in the last few years. Your Zucker types, your tier 2 free agents, I think is more likely of what we would see once free agency opens for them. All right, let's find one more here. Go on through. Find a good one we haven't already talked about. I don't know. Let's talk about the center thing. I've seen a couple people asking about center. This one here. First, let me take a drink here. I need it. Okay. Center is certainly an interesting one. I think it gets buried a little bit with this team because it feels like Kulik and Norris are locked into your top 2 centers. there's a lot of concern in that for sure. Kulik's age, Norris's health, um, Kulik repeating what he did in 30, 40 games last season, over 82. Norris being good if he does play. I think it's a bigger issue that it's really given time of day to talk about. And that's one of the reasons that, I thought Tavares was somebody that I would just try to go through stupid money at if he does hit free agency, because it's a veteran center that you can put into your middle six, and it is somebody that you can then provide some support down in case, Norris can stay healthy or Cooley, can't live up to that, first line center role at its 21-year-old, which is not crazy. If he doesn't, it's putting a lot of pressure on him. But I'm more hopeful because I don't think they're going to go out and get a big splash center. I'm more hopeful that they get somebody who, could. They'll probably start on the wing, but if they needed to move him to center for whatever reason, injury, not working, they can do that. It's kind of what Tage is. So he'll likely start the season on the wing, but they can bump him into the center. If they can get another forward that has that same flexibility, that you can start on the wing and then bump him in the center if you need to, that is what I would target. And I wonder if that's what they're looking for in trade discussions with Byram. If they're looking for a player that has that flexibility, that can kind of be a swing forward for them. I think that is I won't say best case scenario, but I think the best thing that you could hope for right now, in terms of improving the center position. Okay, one more. I'll throw this one in there because this is a pretty easy answer from Kyle. Am I concerned about any of the free agents at this point that restricted free agents that haven't signed? Not even a little bit in any way, shape, or form. Just I'm not. McLeod will get done. That'll happen. Am I worried about someone offer sheeting Bernard Docker, and then it's Levi, who was a 10.2C restricted free agent, which means he has no rights. He can't get an offer sheet. He can't go to arbitration. So you just kind of get to him whenever you get to him, and then it's after that is what am I down to then? Kozak. So really, it's McLeod, and I think that'll eventually get done. I'm not very concerned about that at all. I know some people have said that. That is not a concern to me at all. All right. I'm tired. Very tired. So I think that is where I'm going to call it today. Oh, Quinn. I forgot about Quinn. Someone brought that up. Yeah. Jack Quinn, same thing. Not concerned. If he even stays in the roster, I guess whatever. When they get to that, they'll get to that. Same thing. I don't think anybody's knocking on your door to offer sheet Jack Quinn, who, whatever. They'll get to their RFAs. They usually drag every single year, so it's not a surprise that nothing is done to this point. Okay. As I was saying, tired. I think I'm going to call it. Hopefully the next 24, 48 hours are fun. A lot to talk about. If you're an expected Buffalo member, get in that Discord. Even tonight, Austin is in there going through some video on prospect stuff to get you ready for tomorrow. And then he will be in the lounge, hanging out for the entirety of the draft tomorrow. I'll be around too, of course. Maybe I'll pop in there from time to time, and definitely just be on social media overall, watching things unfold. So we'll talk again soon. Please, Sabres, give me a break that I can go to bed at a reasonable hour tonight, and don't make a trade tonight. If anything, do it tomorrow morning. I think a lot of people could use some sleep. All right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.